Woodshop Diaries, and today I'm going to show you how I built this floating deck slash pergola slash hammock stand. So if you guys are ready to get building, let's go. We recently turned our side yard into a large garden area, and I had plans to add some seating to this space throughout the summer to give us somewhere to hang out outside of our tiny garage house. I still have a lot of ideas, but I decided to tackle a hammock stand first. I didn't want to put this into the ground in case we decided to move it around or we want to move and want to take it with us. So I built it with a floating deck type base to weigh it down and a pergola top to give it a little bit of extra strength and also some shade. I'm so excited about this build, so let's dive right in. I have the building plans for the project linked in the description with all the materials, dimensions, and details. Since this was an outdoor project, I used treated lumber for it. I don't love working with treated lumber, but options are pretty slim in my area for anything else water resistant, and this is by far the cheapest option. So here we are. Once it dries out, it'll match the nice warm tone of my privacy fence next to it, but for now, just ignore the green ugliness. I used 4x4s for the corner posts, 2x6s for the framing and pergola part, and 5/4 decking boards for the top of the deck section. First, I cut the 6 pieces that I would need for the bottom and top triangle frames. The longer diagonal boards have 90-degree cuts on the ends. I cut the one for the bottom to 9 foot 6 inches and the one for the top 2 foot longer so that it can overhang each side 12 inches. But for the triangle pieces, one end will be 90 degrees and the other 45 degrees. So I set my miter saw to miter a 45 and cut my ends just like this. But if your saw isn't big enough for that, you could set your bevel to 45 and cut it beveled instead of mitered. Or just use your circular saw beveled to 45 degrees. Just a note here, if you plan to add the lattice on the sides like I did, I recommend hanging onto these little 45-degree pieces because you will see them again later in this video. I cut the 4 pieces to finish the 2 triangles with one end beveled and one end square. And again, all the measurements for this are listed in the plans below. Before hauling all of these pieces out to the yard and assembling, I cut the corners off the ends of the top diagonal piece to give it that pergola-ish vibe. You could get fancy and cut a decorative curve or leave it square, it's up to you. I hauled these 6 boards to the yard where I first thought that I wanted to put this. Spoiler alert, I changed my mind later. Then I brought out 2 of my 4x4 posts along with all of my tools to start putting things together. I used timber screws to attach the bottom and top pieces to the 4x4s, making sure to keep everything square. While I add the bracing here, I'd like to take a minute to introduce you to our video sponsor, Skillshare. Skillshare is an online learning community with thousands of inspiring classes for creators on topics like illustration, design, photography, video, freelancing, and more. It's curated specifically for learning, so there are no ads, and they're always launching new classes so they never run out of learning opportunities. As a video/content creator, I'm personally interested in learning more about design, photography, and video editing. Since joining Skillshare, I started taking advanced video editing with Adobe Premiere Pro 2020 taught by Jordy Vandeput. I'm working my way through the class on my own time, and already it has taught me more efficient ways to organize and edit my video footage that I wasn't even aware of before. If you're interested in seeing what Skillshare has to offer, the first 1,000 of my subscribers to click the link in the description will get a free trial of premium membership so that you can explore your own creativity. Now, let's get back to the build. Then I flipped it over to attach the back triangle. I screwed the 2 triangle pieces together first, then used a corner clamp to keep things tight. I flipped it up and screwed it into the bottom diagonal piece. I considered doing the same thing here for the top section, but I didn't think with all of the weight that I would be able to flip it back over by myself. So for now, I just did the bottom and flipped it back upright. I screwed these triangle pieces into the front 4x4s as well on each side. Then I screwed the third 4x4 into the back of the triangle. I was going to have to wait until Danny got home to help me with the top section, so for now I moved on to installing the bracing on the bottom section to add the decking boards. I cut these with one square end and one 45-degree beveled end and screwed them in place. Once the bracing was installed at the bottom, I was ready to move on, but I was having second thoughts on whether this was the location that I wanted to leave my hammock stand. I wasn't able to move it on my own, and just in case I did decide to move it, I didn't want to add any more weight to it than I already had. So to kill some time before Danny got home, I began cutting down the decking boards to fit, but not installing them yet. I used a circular saw and a jigsaw to cut down the front board to fit around the posts. Once it was in place, I laid the next piece down and marked on the underside where it needed to be cut and trimmed each end with the circular saw. After I cut a few of the decking boards, Danny got home and we could move it to its new location. It was very heavy and very awkward to carry, but we got it moved to the back corner of our garden, and I think that's a much better place for it. I think that looks nice.
I think it looks better than it does up here, probably.
Alright, we need to level it. Once it was relocated, I used some blocks to level it up and borrowed Danny one more time to help me get the top triangle pieces together. I screwed each board in place on the back side, then added a couple more screws through the front board too. This part was definitely easier with 2 people. Once that was complete, I went back to the decking boards, this time installing what I had already cut with decking screws and finishing up cutting down the last pieces. For the very back piece, I used the piece in front of it to determine its length, then I used my speed square to draw out where to cut to fit around the back posts. I used the jigsaw to cut it out, and I was pleasantly surprised that it fit like a glove. I couldn't do that again if I tried. Once the deck boards were secured, I quit for the day and came back the next day to add the lattice and the pergola. So I'm going to be mounting these to these posts here in order to put this lattice on. But since this post is angled 45 degrees and this one is straight, if I just mounted this right onto here, it would be difficult to mount the lattice. So anyway, what I'm going to do is take these little 45 cutoffs and stick them behind here, screw them to the post, and then I can screw the 2x2 on here so that it's like square to the other post and it'll be easier to screw things on. So that's why I kept these pieces. There are tons of ways to install this lattice, but this is just what I did. First, I installed some braces onto the post to mount the lattice to. Since the front corner posts are turned 45 degrees from the back post, I used these leftover 45 degree pieces that I cut off the ends of the boards and mounted them to the front posts. Then I screwed a 2x2 onto those. The other 2x2 can screw straight into the back posts, and I made sure that these were both the same height off the deck. Then I cut a piece of lattice sheet to fit between the posts and stapled it onto the 2x2s. Next, I trimmed out the lattice using 1x2s. Now, if there was one thing that I wish I had done differently with this project, it's that I wish I hadn't cheaped out on the trim around the lattice. What I used here worked fine, but I feel like it looks scrawny and I wish that I had beefed it up a little bit more. It would have been significantly more expensive, but I do think that the thicker trim would have looked a little bit nicer and been a little bit easier to install. Nonetheless, here we are. Now all that was left was adding the top pieces for the pergola. I cut and installed the center piece first. This ended up being 72 inches long, and I trimmed the corners off the ends to match the top board. I placed it on the center line of the top board and then set the other end at the back corner. To keep things quick and easy, I just toe nailed these boards in place by driving screws through them into the framing at an angle. After the middle piece was in place, I added 2 more pieces on each side 2 foot apart. Since these were 2 foot away from the middle, they needed to be 2 foot shorter, so I cut these 48 inches long. Before I attached, I made sure that the boards were evenly spaced and had equal overhang on the front end to stay consistent. I followed up with 2 more pieces on the outside, 2 foot away again, so 2 foot shorter, so 24 inches long. Once all 5 boards were screwed at the top, all that was left was hanging the hammock. I grabbed some eye bolts for this, a couple washers, and some extra nuts. Now, I'm losing my mind, and I only got 2 washers when I meant to get 4 at the store. But I wasn't about to drive back to town for 2 20-cent washers, so I made do with what I had. I grabbed a drill bit slightly larger than the bolt and measured about 5 feet up from the deck and drilled out a hole. This is the point that I figured out that they had put the 5-inch eye bolts in the 6-inch bin, and I didn't bother checking the labels at the store. So the ones that I had were too short. I want to scream. I was still not willing to go back to town, so again, I made do. I used my drill bit to carve out some space for the eye bolt to go into the post deeper to give me enough coming out the back side to get 1 full nut on. I'm no expert here, but even though this isn't the ideal way to do this, I would bet pretty good money that the hammock I'm using here will fail before these bolts will. It's just a hammock stand. And whatever works, works. Ideally, I would have a 6-inch bolt with a washer on the front and back side, and maybe next time I'll double check the labels. Anyway, once those were installed, I pulled out the hammock and used the included clips to hang it up. By the way, I will link the exact hammock that I used for this project in the description. I built this to fit a hammock that's overall length was about 9 foot, which is a pretty common size from what I could see online. I was pleasantly surprised it worked, it fit, and I was finished. This will be a great place to hang out this summer, and I think the dog loves it even more than I do. I hope to add some more projects to this space as the summer progresses, so if you aren't already subscribed, be sure to follow along so you don't miss out on what's next. I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you want the plans to build your own, don't forget that I've linked them below. Thanks so much for watching, friends, and until next time, happy building!